Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. Secure Talk is brought to you by Adequest, your cybersecurity and compliance partner. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Max Lamothe-Brassard, who is the founder and CEO of LimaCharlie. Max has a really interesting background. He's worked with the Canadian Security Intelligence Services. He's also done some work with CrowdStrike and Google X. And I took a peek at Max's LinkedIn profile. It looks like that he has his name on about 5 different patents related to security. So that's pretty impressive. Max, how are you today?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having me.
That's good. And I can't tell by your office or the background that I'm looking at here where you are. So whereabouts are you?
I'm at home, and currently home is in Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada.
Okay, well, I'm just right down the road from you here. I'm down in the Seattle Bellevue area. So
Nice.
we probably are sharing some very similar cloudy, somewhat rainy, overcast day today, right?
That's right. It's the winter. It's starting.
It's starting. Gosh darn it. We had a great run this summer. I mean, I think it rained like 2 days all summer. So, we gotta get some rain to keep things green around here. What's it like being based in Vancouver? Because I know in the past you've been down in Mountain View, and then now everybody's working remote. Does that affect your work at all?
Not really, because for us, it's been kind of a slightly different story. But when I left Google and we started LimaCharlie, we were 100% remote already. So at first I was actually working out of Cozumel in Mexico for a little while, and then I moved to Vancouver right before the pandemic hit. So it's been an odd move because I've lived here for about 2 years now, but haven't really been able to discover the city as much, right, with all the lockdowns and all that stuff.
Well, how is it there? Because here, again, we're just like 2 hours south. There is a border between us, but things are pretty much opened up. I mean, there's a mask mandate, and there's some restrictions, and some places and some organizations are requiring vaccinations. But in terms of going out, it's pretty much business as usual. How's it up in Vancouver?
It's not bad. For us, I feel like it's kind of been a constant during the whole thing. It was a mask mandate. You could go into places, but had to be careful. Like it was just a constant middle. And then it opened up for a while during summer. They even went away with the mask mandate. And then since about a month, I think it started again with the latest wave. So yeah, it could be better. It could be worse. I'm sure it's coming. It's coming.
Are you letting Americans across the border yet?
I think they did. I think they did open it up. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, hey, I got to ask you first before we talk about exactly what LimaCharlie does. There are hundreds, thousands of security companies out there in the market, and at what point did you say, "Hey, I want to go and make my own"? And what was that thought process?
That's a very good question, and it's really important for how we kind of came up. So when I left Google, right, I had developed an open source EDR while there. And so that was open source. I left having invention assignment. So, essentially the new company, LimaCharlie, we owned this EDR. And I knew, okay, we want to go and, do something in security. And we were kind of at the point of our careers where we didn't want to do the same old thing, right? So having an EDR in security, you can imagine everybody was kind of saying, hey, just start an MSSP or, sell EDR technology. And yeah, that would have been fine. But, we kind of wanted to be able to do something that would have potentially a bigger impact and just wasn't, how many EDRs are there on the market today, right? It's becoming pretty crowded. So that's why I think it's really telling kind of question into how we started, because our very first question was, not, hey, let's put this small technical solution in the market, but at a really high level, like what are we going to be doing, right? And that's how we got into what we're doing now, right? The AWS of cybersecurity,
Well, and I was actually going to ask you, because I mean, you mentioned AWS, but Google, Microsoft, they all have different, EDR solutions, and whether it's a complete apples to apples, we can get into that. But if I'm a enterprise or some organization and I'm looking to do some type of endpoint detection and protection, I kind of feel, I can trust Microsoft or Google, AWS in terms of they're a known entity. Why would I want to look at an alternative?
Absolutely, absolutely. And honestly, the irony is that we're purely based on Google Cloud Platform today.
Okay.
We use AWS because it's the big boy out there. Everybody knows that name. And it's more, we talk about this more in philosophical terms. To your question specifically, I think there's a lot of people doing really good jobs out there. That's not the question, in various products and platforms and all that. But I think the major vendors are also naturally putting more emphasis into the space that they control, right? Microsoft is going to put emphasis on the Windows aspect of what they do. They also have Azure Cloud, so they'll also put emphasis on the Azure Cloud. Everything will kind of be very geared towards what they do, which is understandable. But there's so many products, so many landscapes in security. Every organization is different. I don't think one is able to just say, the Microsoft flavor or the Google flavor or Apple. I guess Apple's not doing something right now that I know of, but those flavors will be the end all be all, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, look, ultimately it's not just the Microsoft flavor of like the specific subset that you're looking for. People are looking for solutions, right? Mm-hmm. And solutions in security, I think, are more generic than that, in the sense that people looking for EDR, you can give them the best Windows EDR that works on Windows Server 2019 right out of the box in Azure, and that's cool. That does not make a full picture in security, right? People ultimately, I think, are starting to get sick a little bit of the product, right? The shiny widget, the shiny EDR that comes in and says, "Oh, this is what you need to be secure." I think the industry is becoming more mature and kind of realizing that security is not bought via a single product or a single widget. It's a suite of solutions, and at a certain level, whoever's providing those solutions, the brand aspect, like that bow on it, isn't where you're actually getting value. So it's the same thing as, that's why we talk about AWS, right? Back in the day, where you went from, I want enterprise database, I have to buy Oracle. And eventually AWS came through and said, well, we have DynamoDB, and yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of like really, really specialized things that Oracle's doing. But ultimately, you get so much value by being able to have, your database in a, self-serve, multi-tenant, scale up, scale down, usage-based, like all those characteristics that go along, what AWS, like when you think of AWS or any cloud provider is nowadays. And I think that's the value that we're bringing in, right? So yeah, we don't have the Microsoft brand. However, if you want to be able to come in and get EDR coverage across pretty much every platform known to man in one similar way, scale up, scale down, self-serve, usage-based, infrastructure as code that works with a SASE product, that works with, artifact ingestion you get, and like all that kind of cloud-based. There's a ton of value there, and I think people are starting to zone or to hone in more on what's the solution, what's the technical problem that will help me fill that security picture in my company, not what's the brand that I need to buy, right?
Gotcha. And in fact, it's weird or interesting. I've been in several discussions over the last few years where we might go into an organization and they might have 2,000 or 3,000 Windows devices, and we're making progress with a product solution. And then somebody raises their hand and says, what about our Mac iOS devices? And then all of a sudden we start sweating and say, well, how many of those do you have? And it turns out, well, we've got, anywhere to say 300 or 500. Well, that's not an insignificant number, and that needs to be addressed. And all of a sudden, when we were leading with a product, we have to backtrack and go back to what you're talking about, more of a comprehensive solution. And sometimes if you put that product out there too soon, you can run into those obstacles. But let's back up even farther. Our listeners run the gamut from people who are, highly experienced, very, very technical, to people who are just getting started in the cybersecurity space, or CISOs that may not be that technical, but they're looking for solutions like you talk about. So let's go back to the beginning of EDR. Explain, if you don't mind, explain a little bit about what EDR is, and then we can get into how your development of an EDR solution in terms of what you felt would be important, the important components of that.
Absolutely. So, put it in, I guess, first thing first, EDR, right? Let's define it, right? Endpoint detection and response. It's a term that's been, I think there's been a shift around that term. So, back in the day, what it kind of, before Gartner put the term on it, what it meant was essentially having an agent that's deployed on an endpoint being a computer, right? Server, desktop, whatever it is, that allowed you to have complete visibility and being able to action or do remediation on those endpoints. So it was a very, I would describe it as a very mechanical thing, right? You don't have to go and remote desktop in a box, or go and send somebody to grab a physical drive. You have the EDR, it's deployed there. You can view everything that's happening, view that historically, and take action. Over the last several years, there's been a bit of a shift, I would say. So the term kind of became a bit overloaded. A lot of people talk about next gen EDR and things like that, or next gen AV. We tend to simplify to boil it down a bit further and just say, you have EDR, which is the ability to go and do these things. And then you have AV, antivirus, which is just a concept of, it's a piece of software I deploy, and it does things automatically for me without having to do anything. Flip side of it is you don't get a whole lot of visibility through it. So the industry's been shifting EDR quite a bit towards AV. Honestly, there's at that point in time a much bigger market in the little piece of software you deploy and you forget about it, right? The EDR is getting a ton of its value from the concept that breaches will happen, right? You can have a great antivirus and that's good, and fully encourage people, you need that to kind of cut a bunch of noise. But at the end of the day, you will need to have some kind of governance over your endpoints. So it's really that root concept when I started LimaCharlie, like back, in the open source days, that was important to me, was I was seeing this shift away from, hey, somebody's giving me, the key to the machine that allows me to do my job, and more towards, the Jedi mind trick, right? Like, don't worry about it, we stop breaches, right? Kind of thing. And so that is what really was behind me. I saw a lot of open source solutions that were great and gave you the keys. They were also extremely difficult to deploy and maintain and run at scale. On the other side, there was antivirus. So I think there was kind of a meaty middle in having value of saying, look, here's here it's a platform that you have the keys to, but that also doesn't require you to spend 6 contractors over the next year to build the technical capability to go and run it. So yeah, does that roughly answer what you had in it?
Yeah, absolutely. But so when you look at your iteration right now of what you're doing, okay, when you have an initial conversation with a customer or a prospect,
Mhm.
Like, what are the what top 2 or 3 questions that you ask?
Um, that is a good question. So usually, obviously one of the questions is we want to understand what type of customer they are. And that's really particularly critical for us because what we're building is not for grandma and grandpa, right? We are building a pro tool for people that their job is doing security. That's where again we always make that parallel to like AWS, right? People can build a website on Squarespace, but if I'm picking a random company, if you're General Motors and you want to build IT, you need more than Squarespace. You need to be able to get access to the underlying pieces. So understanding is really critical for us because sometimes we talk to people that I always give the example of a small lawyer's office with one part-time IT person. That's that's not going to, it doesn't work well with what we do. So we recommend like AVs, right? However, particularly 3 categories that I think we really shine a whole lot is around incident response, MSSPs or MDR, the kind of space around monitoring, and technological companies, right? So that's kind of a description of the type of companies that will have security people inside, right? The people that it's their job to run security day to day, and that you can't bucket all those people together. There's really a big difference. The second thing I think that has a lot of impact nowadays is around the on-premises aspect, right? So there's really interesting patterns across the world, right? It's really easy in the US to kind of see a lot of very big companies that make a lot of use of a lot of cloud-based SaaS solutions. In the rest of the world, it's a very, very different picture. So understanding the type of environment that people are operating under is super critical. Obviously, if you are a small company somewhere in Denmark, and you have offices and you don't want to make use of anything cloud, the types of solutions that you're going to be looking for are drastically different than if you're Fortune 500 in the US, right, using cloud products.
Sure.
And then that's that last part is also I think the last kind of big part of the puzzle is what kind of security landscape do you have already, right? Most people have some kind of landscape. I think I've heard a statistic given to me from a survey that was something like the average, like I think probably larger companies, but the average large company had, I think it was 29 different security products.
Yeah, I've seen similar numbers, and it's just mind blowing. And how do you get all these things to work together and update them? And it's just, and you need that in-house expertise, or you got to outsource it to deploy it. And yeah, how does that work?
That's right. That's right. I like to kind of make the joke too that it's that's the 29 products, and then you got to buy 5 other products to make those 29 products work together too, right?
That's funny, right?
Yeah, it's a really a real challenge, and I think that speaks really to the maturity of the industry, like that shift, right, that I kind of talk about often is that shift from I need to buy a specific product to do a specific thing, and moving away from that and saying, Windows event log forwarding, right? I'm picking an example, right? There was a time where Windows event log forwarding was cutting edge. That being said, nowadays it's well understood, right? People know what it is, and the business incentive to go and say, we're going to buy a separate product to go and do this just for this type of behavior, I think is becoming harder and harder for people for exactly the reason that you mentioned. And it's going to keep going that way, right? We're going to keep going the way of DevOps, to put it in other words, where we simplify that landscape into fewer solutions that are more inherently designed to work together, and not a bunch of add more products to glue things together.
Okay, totally makes sense. Hey, I got to ask you, on your website, I came across the line that said the anti-SIM solution.
Yeah. So that refers specifically to, in 5 words, our approach, right? We say AWS cybersecurity, we're building primitives, right? So we, just like you have EC2, that's a VM, like, does it come in a nice packaging? No, it doesn't. It's a VM. It's there when you need it. So we have EDR, we have SASE, we have the artifact ingest, like, we have a bunch of different things. One of them is called comms. And that speaks to the challenge that we've had since day one, which has been, people are used to Gartner, right? And I'm not saying it's not bad about Gartner, but like, they're used to thinking in terms of these core labels. And so, we would get that question, well, do you have product X? And that's a super loaded question for us, because we don't try to have a SIM product, right? What we do is we look at the problems and we engineer a holistic solution that's going to work in a really generic way, so that, if you wanted to work with your EDR or this other thing, it's kind of going to work naturally. So we came to comms that had a very specific problem set for us, and we said, okay, what do we call this? Well, it's not a SIM. It's sort of anti-SIM. Nobody likes their SIM. How do we even refer to this? We've also been toying with the operational console for LimaCharlie, but it's this idea of we already have all these pieces of puzzle that touch on SOAR and automation and SIM and detection and all that. So what's the slice that's missing when people think of a SIM and the use cases? And it's this operationalization, right? It's this idea of I've got analysts, sitting in seats that need to investigate and respond to alerts. So comms is our response to that, with where we say, okay, what's the most interesting pieces of technology that we think are out there, where we can really streamline this as much as possible. And that's what comms ended up being. You can think of it as taking parts of Slack, where you're defining channels, right? We're defining an incident as part of a channel, and where instead of having an analyst go away from that channel into a bunch of other parts of the app to leverage other features, we're bringing all the features into that channel inline. So you're responding to an incident, you see that it's talking to 3322.org, like a bad domain. You want to know, well, okay, where else in my company is this affected? I want to know, in last year, right? We retain a year of telemetry. Where was that seen? You shouldn't have to go and do 20 clicks. It should be /search 3322.org, right? Inline this into a channel, so that as you're doing your investigation, you're not filing tickets, you're not posting very asynchronous updates by email or doing all that stuff. You're just responding to the event, and at the end of it, you have naturally an audit trace of everything that happened, all the things you looked at, all the things that were reported, all that stuff. So you can go and you could export that somewhere for retention, do all that stuff. So as I described this, some people call that a SIM. Some people call that ticketing. It's a tough one.
No, but I do like the positioning, because it begs the question. So tell me about this, right? And that's what we just did. So what have you seen over the last year or so? I mean, I'm kind of begging the question here because obviously there's a proliferation of endpoint devices, right? I mean, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. There's also this massive acceleration from work from home. I mean, you started off, in a work from home environment, but the pandemic has accelerated it across pretty much all industries. So where do you see like the major needs and developments over from this last year or so, and then going forward?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and I think it goes back a little bit to where in the world. I think there's going to be very different needs from very different parts of the world. Specifically, the around cloud solutions, I think the biggest difficulties are going to be not in how to get access to data, but rather how to be able to get data where it needs to be, and in the ways that can be that it can be leveraged, right? So it's easy to get log data into I am going to pick an example, into Google Cloud logs, right? Like a stack drive, right? It's easy to do that. It's easy to get your logs into some other solution. There's carbon black endpoints that you have. You can shove all of your data into a data lake and then run queries over that. But I don't think that this is exactly the right direction, or rather it's a very inefficient direction. I think the challenge will be in being able to recognize all those sources of data and being able to engineer in a decentralized way how the data flows and how it can be correlated between different parts. I don't think people should have to re-engineer the data flows from the things that they build in kind of a constant fashion, right? I was hearing about somebody who's talking about, they're moving infrastructure from different clouds all the time. Re-engineering data flow solutions every time that happens is not the right way, I think. And there's going to have a lot of work that needs to be done in figuring out as an industry, what's the underlying fabric that can make this work, not what's the heavy product that we can put in the middle that will kind of solve it all.
Yeah, I mean, so in sometimes we have almost a surplus of data. Data's becoming a commodity, but the tool that allows you to go through and pull the exact data that you need at the time you need it in the way that you need it, and even if you can automate some of the actionables off of that data, would be where the value is. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. And the idea of just storing in one gigantic, I'm simplifying it, but gigantic file the data and then grepping through it does not feel like that fabric, right? It feels a little bit old school. Yeah.
So let me ask you. I mean, can tell us a little bit about your organization, because I'm curious. When you are in this space, some of the challenges organizationally that you faced in terms of getting out and evangelizing your solutions.
And that's been our greatest challenge, right? I talked about this maturity thing, and so when we started, which was about 3 years ago, it was much more of a challenge because even the idea of a cloud EDR, although many other players already were kind of in that space, just that was a new way of thinking about it. The whole AWS of cybersecurity, would get us blank stares because we were, as an industry, so far away from that, right? Where if I want an EDR, of course I have to go and do the dance, with a with a vendor over the next couple of months, and then do this big contract. So for us, the big challenge was kind of to break down this barrier, the two barriers. One barrier was the one around the type of environment, like the type of business environment that we were doing. I know it sounds, a bit, it's a bit disconnected from security, but it's kind of also a pretty important part of it, which is this idea that, why is getting an EDR any different than spinning up a virtual machine?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of, it's a really fundamental question. But, the whole mentality was not quite there yet. Now that's gotten a whole lot better. The second one is around, you touched on it earlier, around kind of that sort of that brand name aspect, right? The, are you running, the Microsoft, I forget what it's called, ATP, I think, right? Microsoft ATP, or, which brand name, and less, what visibility are you getting in a useful way to your people running security operations? And I think that's the biggest part of the changes that we're bringing in, that we have to talk with people through that, and as soon as people see it, it's really, really interesting. It's this idea that we used to talk about EDR, we used to talk about agents, and now we're talking about sensor. Not sensor as an EDR. Some folks used to talk about it that way, but for us it has a very specific meaning, and that sensor is generic, right? So that sensor might be a Windows box running an EDR, but it might also be the network pipe of a server running somewhere. It could be a syslog. It could be your Google Cloud audit logs. It could be your Carbon Black endpoints, all coming into the platform. And this idea of not being, as a siloed entity, it is pretty new. But as soon as people start to see that, I can kind of use LimaCharlie as this fabric of bringing telemetry together and making it actionable, and then getting it to where it needs, then the light bulb starts going off. So it's been really, it's been a really interesting thing to look at other industries in the same way. Recently we were talking internally with our front end development people, that build a web app, and they were telling us about this platform called Segment. Segment is huge, and as soon as we started talking about this, we realized the types of overlap that there are between what we do and what they do, right? In their case, it's events that relate to customers on web applications, and very kind of web events. In our case, what we're saying is no, we're going to bring in all these data sources together in a very live fabric, right? We're not just dumping it in a store. We are making things available where that fabric, where if you want to access it via APIs, you can. And whether you're accessing a cloud, log, audit log of some kind, or an EDR, or you want to interact with a Chrome agent or an EDR, there's no fundamental reason that it should work differently, right? That's where the importance is when we talk about AWS, but really cloud provider of cybersecurity, is that it's not just about bringing products together, right? Palo Alto, I don't know how many companies they buy every year. That's, and not that there's anything wrong, but buying all those products together, it doesn't make an AWS. It doesn't make that ecosystem where you're going to be able to get the results, the security results and integrations that you need, without having to go and put tickets at 5 different vendors hoping that they might integrate together, kind of thing. Sorry, that's a long answer.
No. And I just recognize the challenge of like you said, not being branded and launching a new kind of I wouldn't say it's a new paradigm, but almost it's a paradigm shift, right? And going out there and I would imagine that with your customer, it's really important to have an advocate inside who says, this is the way we got to go. But with security, a lot of the decisions are made upon price, but a lot of them are made on perceived risk. And we don't want any problems around here. Right? It's like we just want to see CYA, right? And so I'm curious. What have you found to be the most effective way to get traction in an organization? Is that a demo, a trial, a training, in an advocate inside? I mean, what do you do?
Yes, so that is bang on to another one of our kind of critical things internally as a new companies that we have to deal with. So it's I would say we're taking an approach right now, which is if you look in the startup world, it's the product-led growth, right? A little bit like Slack or other products that kind of come in at the technical level, at the ground level, and build up. So that is how we've gotten to most of our users. Absolutely correct around the champion, right? So very, very often the way that we will get into a company is some security person in that company talks to a friend of theirs that works at an MSSP or somewhere else, and there's this LimaCharlie thing. They start looking at it. Again, we have a free tier, 2 free sensors, like all that stuff, a little bit like AWS. So people start playing with it. They really like it. They go back to work one day and they go, with LimaCharlie, it'd be a lot cheaper and a lot better, and we could integrate and have it work with these 2 other systems that we have in a lot much better fashion. And as they roll out new primitives, then we can just crank up like the notch, right? And just start using these other primitives without having to go and do the whole dance with new vendors and all that stuff. And they end up selling it within the company. It's there's pros and cons to all of this, obviously, right? Especially as we talk to very, very large companies, we do often get very unintuitive questions for us, right? As engineers, I guess I would say. We don't have a sales team, and we sometimes the first question we get is how much money have you raised, which is super interesting. I think it says a lot about that risk apprehension that you're describing. So we know that it's a direction that we're heading in, and we are funded, and for the longest time we were actually profitable. Now we're expanding more, so we're not worried about hey, are we going to be able to sometimes talk to people, are we going to be a business in a year? Like that's long gone preoccupation. But we're also extremely keen to build in that vision, to build towards that vision. And what that means is we need to build to specific needs of security people. What we don't want to do is we did not want to raise $10 million on the back of a napkin idea and then get into some big company because the CEO had a beer with the CISO and they're friends for a long time, and we get shoved down the throat of the security people and they're like, yeah, it kind of works, and that's not what we wanted to do, right? We're security people as our background, technical people. So that's really why we took this product-led growth approach. And thankfully, as a company now, we're seeing that gap being reduced, right? We're talking more and more to CISOs that we get introduced to in different ways, and where now that we have more of those primitives in a row, we're better able to kind of demonstrate this idea, the business level decision and thought process around it. And so that gap is reducing, which is really great for us. We're hoping to grow, obviously.
Do you ever get asked about customer references?
Yes, all the time, which is another interesting question for us, because we have a couple of good ones, right? So the 2 big ones we always quote are Snapchat and Carta. They're both like public technological companies. So more than happy to talk about those guys. Again, great relationship with them. But we have a ton of customers that are IR MSPs, MSSPs, which means if you combine that with the fact that we're very we're OEM friendly, right? We put out infrastructure like Amazon. You want to build your company on Amazon, that's fine. You don't have to put a disclaimer on your company website that you're built on Amazon. Nobody cares, right? So it means that we have a lot of customer, of relationships with these organizations building on LimaCharlie, and but we don't have a relationship with their end customers, right? So we have many IR companies that are doing incident response in Fortune 500, but we don't have that relationship, so we can't really speak about those specific names. So that's why we often fall back on, Cardano snapshots are the two big ones people recognize.
Yeah, I mean, those are impressive names, and I have to say that that's one of the challenges in this industry is that customers want references. And sometimes they're willing to pick up the phone and talk to, but oftentimes customers are like, we don't want to say anything about any of the security products that we're using or any of the processes or anything like that, because that's just all, and you can understand that to a certain degree, right? I mean, and so that can be an ongoing challenge. And the fact that you've got two, kind of marquee brands that have allowed you to go out and say, yeah, we're partnered with LimaCharlie. That's awesome. If a couple of last questions here. If anybody listening wants to get some more information about LimaCharlie, where can they go? And do you have any upcoming virtual events or anything like that?
Absolutely. So LimaCharlie.io is the hub, and you'll find specifically around events. So we do have webinars coming up soon. Next one is about we're integrating an atomic red team. So to be able to run the simulations on a test tenant and see the detections you're getting from the alert, the rules that you're putting in. So that DevOps aspect. And we also have edu.limacharlie.io, which is, again, AWS approach. So we want people to understand, how the platform works, how to leverage it best. And we don't make money selling training. So, this is a free educational platform that we put out with a lot of information there. So it's a great way of getting going. And yeah, there's that free tier as well. 2 organizations, which is like a tenant in LimaCharlie, and 2 sensors per organization. Everything's free underneath that. So if you're a researcher or you're playing with stuff, it's really great.
That's awesome. And last question, any new developments, products, solutions that you have in the pipeline that you want to talk about now?
Yeah, so we are about to go into our beta for, I mentioned we have net endpoints, we have EDR endpoints. We're really starting to the beta for that integration of external telemetry in real time. So, the example of, you have carbon black endpoints, and you want to bring that into that fabric. That's that new capability. We don't have a public name for it yet, but we're starting to beta that, and that will actually be open source. So that means people that want to bring in their own telemetry from their own endpoints or other solutions, they'll be able to do that. So that's going to be really, really interesting.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, hey, Max, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot. I took like a half page of notes here, and I'm going to have to go online and research to figure out exactly what you were talking about sometimes. But no, this has been really great. Excited for LimaCharlie and the progress you've made, and wish you a really successful close on 2021.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.